If you have ever been to a fight practice and at one venue you are doing rather well, the moves are flowing, the techniques are working, you're able to experience more success than not. But then you go to another venue and all of a sudden those same techniques that you were using, the same moves that you were using, are not gaining you that same kind of success that you did at a prior venue. Well, likely it is not because of the fact that your fencing has changed, but rather because you are not treating your opponents like a master. Hey everybody, I'm Rob Childs, a Rapier swordsman out of the United States, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a tool that I use of self-teaching that I have been using throughout the entirety of my fencing career. Now, for my own students, dispersed as they are across the United States, and even those students that I am mentoring overseas, it's not possible for me to be standing physically in the same room with them, but it is possible that they can actually self-teach themselves in order to take their martial practice to that next level. And that practice that I'm talking about is the one of treating your opponent like a master. Treating your opponent like a master is going to do a couple of things for you, but one of them is certainly more important than the other, and that is to help you discern what moves, what techniques in your repertoire are going to be useful across the wide spectrum of skill levels you're going to face. A lot of fencers I have noticed have the problem of utilizing techniques that work on those mid-range fencers and below. Now, as we all know, if you've got a couple of years even under your belt in fencing, you know that instinct and reflex is a tremendous part of our art. What we train our bodies to do is what's going to happen in those split-second moments without thought. Now, the problem that these other fencers have is that if you're utilizing moves that only work against that mid-range fencer level and below, well, the time comes when you ultimately end up facing someone who is veteran level or master level, and that move is going to come out while you're fencing against them, and they're going to make you eat steel for it. Now, the advantage that you have, this self-teaching tool that I'm talking about in terms of treating your opponent like a master, is going to help you discern which of those moves are and are not valid against that master level opponent. So if you have an entire repertoire of moves that are effective against that master level and below, as opposed to having some in there that are only going to be useful against that mid-range fencer and below, then everything you have, everything you use is going to be valid against whoever it is that you are fencing. But in those instances where you are training your reflexes, you're training those instincts in order to utilize those moves, you're going to see those scenarios coming out against those much higher and much more advanced level fencers. And that is just not acceptable. Now, if you're like me and you like to train to the martial perspective, right? HEMA, for example, in those tournament circuits, they're a great laboratory for you to learn. Absolutely. But if you're like me and you also want to make sure that you are a martial fencer, then this technique or I should say this self-teaching tool, this practice of treating your opponent like a master, working on those techniques that are only suitable for master level and below as opposed to a certain section of those skill levels, then what you're going to do is, if you were a fencer back in the day and you found yourself on the road and you're about to get into a sword fight with somebody, you have no idea what that person's skill level is. That could be somebody who is a novice, maybe they are a veteran level, maybe they are actually a master. If you're the kind of fencer who has moves in your repertoire programmed into your reflexes that only work against the mid-range and below, then that encounter is probably going to end poorly for you. So if you want to be able to take on your own your fencing level to the next level, then what you need to do is to treat every one of those opponents like they are a master. Now here is a great way you can do that. One common practice that I tell my students to engage in every time they go to a fight practice, every time they ever do any sort of sparring whatsoever, is at the end of every exchange, whether you've delivered a good blow or you have received one, is to stop for 2 seconds and ask yourself, why did that happen? Now, in the case, for example, if I am sparring someone and I happen to hit them, I should stop, and it just takes 2 seconds. Stop and ask yourself, why did that get through? And was there anything my opponent could do in that particular tempo that could have stopped it? And even more importantly, was there anything my opponent could have done in that same exchange that could have ended up with me being stabbed as well? If the answer to that question is yes, there is something they could have done, then clearly that technique itself was not a masterful technique. And now you have to ask yourself the question, Is it because the technique itself is invalid, or is there something I can do in order to sharpen that technique and make it masterful? If you are always looking at every single one of your exchanges from this perspective, then what you are doing is you're not only training yourself to do the technique in a masterful way, but you're also able to weed out those bits and pieces that are not masterful, those that are not valid, those that could end up getting you stabbed if luck is not involved. And that way you become truly a masterful, skilled swordsman as opposed to a lucky swordsman. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure that back in the day, there was no such thing as old lucky swordsmen. Those individuals are clearly the ones who weeded out all of the techniques that were invalid and utilized only those techniques that worked on the entire skill spectrum from master and below.